Okay, in this video, I want us to have a look at topic 4.4, describe the role of the government as an employer. Okay, which is a bit of a weird topic, and that's going to be relatively quick because we've already talked about like the main areas, like look at the video on fiscal policy, because in fiscal policy, I have already identified the main areas of government spending. And so, well, of course, one type of government spending is when the government hires what we call civil servants, people who work for the government. You can call them government workers, people who work in the public sector, right? Anybody working for the government works in the public sector. So it could be that you permanently work for the government, okay? Or it could be that you are, let's say, a private company that does some consulting, or you're independent and the government hires you skills for a short mission or something like that. But mostly, let's keep it simple. When we talk about the government as an employer, let's just keep it simple. Everybody working for the government. And in fact, in most countries, the government is the first employer, which means that there are no other private business that hires more than the government in most developed countries. In Switzerland, I looked at the statistic just now. It seems like you have 10% of the workforce, of the active population who works in the public sector. It's the first employer in Switzerland. I'm looking at some statistics. Yeah, so you have 230,000 people in Switzerland who work in the public sector, who work for the government, and you have half of them, interestingly enough, guess where? In healthcare, in public healthcare. That's a lot. Can I find any other? This is an article from Le Temps. No, it's basically the only thing that I wanted. Right. Okay. Of course, healthcare is not the only sector or industry within the public sector that generates jobs. So let's just identify more generally. This was just some statistics about Switzerland. And of course, in Switzerland, maybe there is one final thing we can say is that there are 3 levels of government. You have like the confederal government, the national government. You have the cantonal government, canton, and then you have the municipal cities. And each level of government can employ people. You can be working for the confederal government, for national government. You can be working for the canton of Geneva. You can be working for the city of Versoix, for example. Okay, just remember this number, which is just 10% of the overall jobs in Switzerland. 1 person out of 10 works in the public sector, apparently 50% in healthcare. Generally speaking, who works for the government, or like what industries are most represented in the public sector? Well, of course, there is public healthcare. That definitely matters. That's probably number 1 in many countries. Number 2 is most likely public education. Like teachers, everybody working in schools, for the administration, like the teaching and non-teaching staff, or public schools, of course. Then you have all those working like the for national defense, soldiers, anybody involved in the provision of national defense. You have all those who work for public companies. It could be, I don't know, transportation, Like if there is like a public railway company, or if there is a public airline, could be something like that. Could be transportation, could be utilities. Like if there is like a public electricity company, a public water company, anything that has to do with energy, utilities, energy, EDF in France, for example, could be public services. For example, like post office, anything that has to do with anything that has to do with justice, law enforcement. Talked about national defense, but it could be like the police. Usually the police works for the cities, but it could be the other groups. For example, in France, we have like la police, which works for cities most of the time, and then we have la gendarmerie, which are part of the army. They are hired by the national government. So healthcare, public education, national defense, public companies. What am I missing? Give me a second. I think I've identified most. Then of course you all have who, let's just call them work in just public administration. Those who will make sure that regulations are being enforced. Those who are just gonna like file some paperwork, who gonna like those who work, for example, for the tax office, making sure people pay their taxes, collecting the information. All those working for governmental agencies, for example, the competition agencies that usually are hired, even if it's independent, they are their jobs is funded by the government. All those working for social welfare programs, like anybody working in the administration, the public administration. So what am I missing? I have a long list, which is a bit too long, so I'm trying to keep it focused. So yeah, national defense, legal and judicial system. Could be anybody working for, well, the list is quite long. That's not a very interesting topic, is it? Because we're just making a long list. Could be anyone working, for example, environmental protection. Okay, I think that's more than enough. Now, this topic is not just about making a long list of all possible jobs you can do for the government. The question is the role of the government as an employer. So of course, we've argued that there is a public sector where there are some economic activities that are funded, that are under the responsibility of the government. And of course, the government needs resources to provide those goods and services. So you have an example of the various areas that require the people to basically work for the government. Why does this matter? Because of course, clearly, as an employer, and depending on how much the government wants to hire people, the government can influence the rate of unemployment. Meaning that if unemployment is very, very high, then one solution to try to reduce it is to offer more jobs. Okay, in the public sectors. Okay, well, we are the first employer in this country. There are a lot of people who struggle to find a job, and unemployment is quite high. Let's just make an effort. Of course, it's going to be costly. It means that government spending will have to increase because more people will have to be paid. But remember that this is also something that can benefit the government, because more people who work means more people who pay taxes. and this can create a positive multiplier effect. Remember the multiplier effect? If you give more income to the people, they will spend more. Somebody else is going to receive more income. They're going to spend more. So deciding to hire more people can, at the end of the day, even if it's like an upfront cost for the government, we have to pay more, but it can be beneficial. And on the other hand, if you give a job to someone, you in that case, you no longer give unemployment benefits. So okay, you have to pay a salary, but that does not increase the overall expenditure by the full amount of the salary. And plus, if you take into account the taxes that are going to be paid, like this person now works, has an income, so more VAT is going to be paid, more income tax is going to be paid. At the end of the day, that can be quite beneficial for the economy. So it can influence the rate of unemployment. Of course, this has a major impact on the government budget balance, but like I said, it is not as simple as that. It's not necessarily a heavy burden. And therefore, if we increase the rate of unemployment, this can stimulate economic growth. Just by offering more works, more jobs to the population. This can allow the government to expand, like especially if we hire more people. Okay, of course, you just reverse. If we hire less people, it's going to reverse everything. It can expand its influence over the economy. Okay, if there are more people working in the public sector, it means that okay, the government has a greater influence, controls more economic activities, like a bigger share of the economic activity than before, and this is something that gives better control over economic activity. Is there anything else? There is honestly not much to say. The role of the government as an employer, just talk about the various areas where people work for the government. Why does this matter? It matters because this way we can ensure that certain public services, certain important public services will be provided. And my point, maybe it's not clear this way, so let me explain. My point is that there are certain public services that can't really be provided by the private sector. Think about, I don't know, like the justice. Can you have like a private justice system, like a private company, like a profitable private company that would just judge people? Can you have a private police? Like, imagine several police companies that would just enforce the law. It doesn't really make sense, right? That would be a militia, and that's really not something that works well usually. So my point is that there are some public services. It's important that they are provided by the government. Besides, we also talked about public goods, right? Like national defense. I talked about national defense. Public services. Here I'm thinking about justice, for example. And there are some public goods that would not be produced by the private sector. Of course, again, national defense is a good example, or even, well, that's the main one from the government's perspective. But even the like public order and safety can be regarded as a public good. Private firms don't really have an incentive to produce these goods because they are non-rival and non-excludable. So no profit can be made out of these services. That's why it is important for the government to employ the people that are needed to offer these public services. Also, something else that you could mention, which tends to relate to government intervention in general, but why do we hire a lot of people in healthcare and education? We can just argue that healthcare and education are merit goods. And something we know about merit goods are that they are not sufficiently produced by the private sector. Yeah, the private sector will produce some. There are private hospitals, there are private schools. But what we know about merit goods, which are goods that generate positive consumption externalities, I repeat, a merit good is a good that generates positive consumption externalities. We know that in that case, the market fails. We know that not enough is going to be produced. And that's why it is important that the government hires doctors, nurses, teachers to just provide more, that they work in public schools, they work in public hospitals to complement the private supply of these goods. Otherwise, it's not going to be sufficient. So it's an important reason for which the government must hire all of these people. Another reason of the another role of the government as an employer is to reduce inequalities. Because of course, we know that unemployment is something that tends to increase the extent of inequalities. Of course, if you have like a lot of people who are unemployed, the income gap and ultimately the wealth gap is going to be quite significant. But if the government ensures that most people can have a job in the economy, this is something that truly helps to reduce the extent of inequalities. And that can avoid what we call political unrest, social unrest, when there are tensions within the economy. Okay. Give me a second to try to come up with any additional points. So we've talked about national defense. Okay, that's a public good. It's quite obvious. We've talked about healthcare, education. These are merit goods. So yeah, the private sector does not produce enough. And especially healthcare and education are very labor intensive. That's something you can mention. Very labor intensive means that, well, for these services, they are mostly produced with people, not machines, right? So that's why it's so important to hire people in public education and people in healthcare. We talked about so then anyone working, something for public order and safety, and the like office workers taking care of the regulations. Yeah, honestly, that's about it. I don't feel like I missed too much. We have a look at the list that I found. So yeah, we need people. We need to hire people to make sure that the rules, that the law are enforced, that people comply to those regulations. That we need people to make sure that those policies are implemented. We need people to deliver public services. We need people to make sure that the judicial system, the legal system functions properly, judges, lawyers, admin staff. We need people to, advise the government, people working for the government, to advise them to design their economic policies. We need people to just design some environmental protection laws. So yeah, overall, it is the government as an employer plays a vital role in providing essential services, implementing policies, ensuring the well-being of citizens, and maintaining the overall functioning of society. Yeah, what you can remember is the data in Switzerland. So remember, 230,000 people working in the public sector. That's about 10%. That sounds a bit low, 10%. Right, let's just say 230,000 public sector jobs currently. Half works in public healthcare, apparently. This was this article on Le Temps. And remember, there are 3 levels of government: confederal, cantonal, municipal. And of course, every level of government is free to hire workers. That's it.